course is You and AI, a collaboration, because one of the things that I really hope you take away from working with AI is a collaborative stance rather than kind of a tool that just like takes the human out of the loop. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and then kind of do introductions from you guys. I started my career at Bain, which might be a funny place to kind of start here because it was a long time ago. It was not recently. But AI is getting increasingly good at the Bain skill set. And so it's something that's like on my mind as I use AI all the time, is that it's getting good at things like doing analysis and presentations and synthesis. And so I'll probably mention it. And so want to kind of start with that piece of context. I came to AI through reading. So every year for the last 15 years, have read this volume called The Best American Science and Nature Essays. And in the 2020 edition, they collected 2 pieces on large language models. And so I started kind of following the technology before any of the major tools were released. And so when ChatGPT was released, it seemed like such a big discontinuity that I ended up writing the first education sector op-ed on it for the 74, because even though it wasn't a professionally useful tool at the time, it was like very clear that it was already better than the median American school student at reading and writing. And just through my own interests, I've got like more than 10 years spent kind of thinking and learning cognitive science, which is a lot of how these models work. So that's another vector that I come to it from. But what really interests me is how AI can support better thinking, decision-making, and execution. And in general, with this course, I want to help people build reusable systems that provide compounding leverage. So instead of kind of having a one-off chat all the time, you can start kind of like using all of the levers available within the AI system to help you. So we're going to start with, I think I just got just about where everyone is today, but if you want to just put in the chat, where are you today? Okay, and then we're going to use this order to do a round of introductions, so you don't have to wait for me. Yalda, you're first, so you'll go first, and then when she's done, Adam, you'll just tap yourself in and just share your name and something about the work that you do.
My name is Yalda Oles, and I run a nonprofit based at UCLA that I founded that sits at the intersection of entertainment, media, developmental psychology, and young people.
I'm Adam Cohen, as I said, based in Jersey City, and I work in real estate financing, the construction and rehabilitation of affordable housing.
I can go. My name's Kyra, and I work with a team called Ensemble, and I'm an event manager. We specialize working with nonprofits and organizations to help plan their events and their convenings, and we're based in Dallas, Texas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Lim, and I work in philanthropy at the Eli Edith Broad Foundation here in LA with our education work.
And hi, everyone. My name is Sumit. I'm a communications professional working in the human rights and social justice space.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I work also in philanthropy at a family foundation doing grant making around criminal justice policy topics. And I also have a coworker, Carson, who cannot make it to this first session, but she will be here for the remainder, and she has the same job that I do. So.
I'm Sharon Lyle. I am the president of Ensemble, and our whole small team of 4 is participating in this session. So you met Kyra. Julie will come after me, and we also have a colleague, Kat, who wasn't able to be here today, but will join the rest of the sessions. And like Kyra mentioned, we do event production for mostly nonprofit clients.
And I'm Julie, also part of the team. I'm one of the event producers on staff, and we love doing events. Happy to be here.
Great. I've got a few norms for us, and rather than me reading them at you, if you just want to kind of read through these and then put ready in the chat when you've read them, we can then get into the good stuff. Okay, so there is we're going to talk about privacy in depth in a couple of weeks, but there's one setting I want to make sure that everyone has straight, which is that you've got model training turned off. So right here, I'm looking at it inside ChatGPT, and I will open up ChatGPT so you can see where it's located. Every AI has a version of this. If you're on an enterprise or education account, it has likely been kind of done for you and you might not even see the setting. But if you're on a personal account or you have a personal account outside of your work account, the most important privacy setting, you'll go to settings and then settings and then data controls. And then you want to make sure that improve the model for everyone is turned off. This is a group of very socially oriented people. We might want to help. This is not the place to help unless you want your data to escape into the world. So I want everyone to kind of just like check their setting. And when you've either confirmed that it's set to the right place or you've got it set to the right place, go ahead and put ready in the chat. If you have any questions about this, feel free to ask.
How do we get to that? I don't have data controls on my ChatGPT.
Are you on an institutional account?
Nope.
You're on a personal account?
Personal plus.
Personal plus. What kind of, do you want to share your screen with me real quick? Let's see what you got.
Let's hope there's nothing private. Please ignore. I kind of actually don't want to share my screen because I've done different chats and I don't want you to see them.
Well, why don't we do this, which is that I can't see what your options are. So why don't you just stick around for a minute at the end and we'll make sure we get it set up for you.
Great.
Any other questions on where to find that setting or?
I might have found it actually.
Okay.
And
there's
if we're
something
using
different about
Claude, where would it be for that?
It's almost the same. So let me just
Thanks.
show. Yep. And so Claude got a new model yesterday. So if I go to settings, and then I go to, is it under, let's see, I think it's under account. No, privacy.
Under privacy.
Yes, exactly. And so then there's exactly. So you would want to make sure that you've got help improve Claude is toggled to off here.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So with that, we are going to talk about AI as a writing partner today. And the reason that I start with this topic is because if people have done one thing with AI, it's work on writing. And so it's a good kind of like table setting topic before we get into more levers that people more frequently don't use or that they underutilize. And so next week, we'll talk about AI as a workflow partner and we'll use projects. Is anyone already using projects at all? Nope. Okay, great. That'll be fun. And then we're going to get into AI as a thought partner and we'll talk more about privacy, as I mentioned, but then also go deep on memory and how you can set up memory. Is anyone already working with memory at all? Great. And then we'll talk about AI as a knowledge partner. So we'll think about kind of selecting the right model for the job. Does anyone kind of change the model ever between tasks? And then we'll do deep research. Does anyone do deep research? No. Okay, this is great. And then we'll talk about connectors. And then for our last session, we'll do AI as a quantitative analysis partner. And at the moment, this is my favorite session. Again, hearkening back to starting my career at Bain and having to build Excel models. And now there's just really incredible tools for doing analysis. Okay, and so I want to start with just like a question about writing, which is what are some of the tells of AI writing? And you should feel free to just call out here. How can you tell if something is like written by AI?
Dashes.
M dashes, yep. M dash proliferation. What else?
bullet points. I'll just keep going.
Yeah. 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 Yalda, as somebody who works at the intersection of storytelling, you've got this on lock, I'm sure. Anyone else have noticed any?
Usually there's a lot of like simple sentence structures. It can feel really clinical and choppy in its writing.
Yes, very clipped sentences. Way more short sentences than a human would put it in a row. What else?
There's some kind of language that especially ChatGPT uses that's a very, I forgot what it is, but somebody told me and then I started noticing it, and I'm sure you know, like there's a very language sentence structure.
Yeah, and so like one of the things I'll say to stand up for large language models is that they're writing, like ChatGPT is writing for a distracted reader skimming on their phone, right? And so it's kind of like some of the choices that they're making are to make it easier for people to read, because people don't really like reading that much if you think about the median user. And so they do a lot of things to make it more scannable and more obvious what the answer is, which means the writing quality is lower, but the kind of like ability to quickly get the information out is faster. And so you got this one, Erica, but the clip sentences of 2 words or maybe 3. One of the constructions that's used a lot is like, it's not blank, it's blank. You've got excessive signposting, which I think is a ChatGPT specific one, where it's like, let's unpack this. And then it says something, or here's why it matters, right? Where it's kind of like putting a lot of tags in front to be like directing you to why the set of things is going to follow. And then you've got short paragraphs of just 1 or 2 sentences, then on to the next. Lists of 3. It never, like a list of 3 is great. Like a lot of these constructions are actually useful in writing. It's just when they're overused that they kind of like start detracting from the writing. And so we'll take a look at some concrete examples of these, but it never does lists of 2 or 4 or 5. It's always a list of 3, and often kind of in a duplicative way, where kind of like the words are not necessarily adding. There's also a lot of emojis to visually mark content. I think this is more a ChatGPT and Gemini thing, less a Claude thing. The M- proliferation that we talked about. Few semicolons or colons or parentheses, especially in ChatGPT. So again, it's like you've got the M- doing the work of all other forms of punctuation. And then you often have a lot of unnecessary adjectives or adverbs generically used, right? And so kind of it's like putting them in because we're used to having one in that spot, but they're not actually adding a lot to what's being said. And then I think this is one that kind of like, I think probably bothers all of us when we encounter it, is the tone doesn't match the situation or the person writing it. Where like you're used to kind of like what Erica sounds like in your mind or what Julia sounds like in your mind. And then you get like an email or a newsletter from them and it's signed by them, but it doesn't match, right? Like, and that feels kind of discordant to us. And so I think kind of like the theory of mind often isn't there in the writing. And then you've got kind of like just like either a flattening of uncertainty where kind of like it sounds confident even in situations where it shouldn't, or it presents false balance, right? Where it's kind of like, oh, I need to present 2 sides, and like the evening news, it's going to kind of do that even if the 2 sides aren't comparable in weight. And so like, let's take a look at a couple examples of this. And so this is something I pulled off of LinkedIn. I don't know for sure that it was written by AI, but I know for sure that it was written by AI. And so it says like, I redesigned a website for $3,000. It turned into a $10 million company. So it's these chopped up sentences, right? 6 years ago, I took a freelance gig for a struggling startup. The founder was brilliant, but his product was failing. What impressed me wasn't his idea, it was how he handled it. And there's just this same rhythm to all of these very flat sentences. So they've taken something that should be inherently interesting, right? Turning a $3,000 website into a $10 million plus company, like we'd probably all enjoy doing that. And yet kind of there's nothing here. There's nothing to this story. And so this is an example of something that's either been like over edited by AI, where they've kind of given it too many passes, or kind of the person didn't kind of give it enough concrete detail in the first place. And so in a minute, we'll talk about kind of strategies to get better writing quality from AI, but I want to start by just kind of showing you kind of like what makes bad AI writing. Now I've got one more example for you, and this is something that it wrote for me probably about a year ago at this point. And so this time I'm going to give you the turn. What do you see here that makes this bad AI writing?
In the first sentence, that's not a crisis of literacy, it's a design signal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why there would be an M dash there. That's a comma, maybe a colon at best.
Yeah, for me, it's the like, in particular, it's the two things about it. It's not blank, it's blank. And then also kind of like this, like, it's a design signal feels like this over signposting of, it's like drawing too big of a conclusion from kind of like a single, kind of data point, right? Although I guess I could argue that it's okay to take it as a design signal. What else?
3's performative, extractive, disconnected, skim, summarize, comply.
Yep. And like a list of 3 is great, but 2 lists of 3 back to back, not great. What else? To build on Adam's point, I think the sheer number of M dashes is also a problem. There's like 3 M dashes in 10 sentences here. Any last observations?
Also, just the structure, you're mentioning these very short paragraphs. These are just basically lines.
Each of these paragraphs is 1 sentence.
Yeah.
Just not the right. You can do that like once or twice per piece. If you do it every sentence, it doesn't work.
Beginning to think one of the attorneys that I work with may use AI for all of the emails that he sends me.
Probably. So I like to think of it as like the right amount of seasoning can make a dish, but too much can ruin it, right? Like it just becomes salty at some point. And it's the same for AI and writing. So what we're going to spend the rest of our time on today is how to actually use AI to help with writing without it turning into the examples of the things we just talked about. And so something I have been asked is like, how much do you actually use AI for particular things? And so throughout the course, I'll kind of show you how much I actually use it. And I would say for writing, I use it from somewhere between 0% to 80%, depending on the task and the job. And we'll look at some examples of that here in a minute. And so I want to start out by kind of actually showing a framework for thinking about the writing, because I think the way to partner with AI actually depends on the type of task, right? So I think of it as like lowercase writing, uppercase writing, and exclamation point writing, right? And so lowercase writing are things like meeting notes or compliance reports, applications that no one's actually going to read or evaluate, but you have to complete, documentation of a process, or maybe FAQs, right? And so these are things where kind of it's much more about the informational content than it is about authorial voice. In the middle, I think you start to get to things like website text or donor or investor updates, or LinkedIn posts, or feedback, and emails, right? Where it's like there's some amount of voice, but there's also a lot of informational content. And it's maybe not kind of like mission critical, though maybe you could argue some of these it is. And then at the exclamation point side, you've got things like personal statements, recommendations, research papers, and investment committee memos. And where you put these things might be different for your organization or your work or your context, right? And so I've had somebody take the class who was like, actually for us, investment committee memos are in the middle because by the time we write them, we've actually done a ton of work already. And so it's not really about voice. But the reason it's there is because somebody gave me the example that that's a place that they actually limit how their employees use AI because they want to make sure that it's their employees' best thinking and not AI's. And so we're going to take a look at examples from each of these columns and how the strategies to use with AI change across this spectrum. And so we're going to start with lowercase writing. So a common approach for lowercase writing is what I call the FCAGE method. So it's framing the task. So you want to describe to AI like, hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Making sure it has enough context. And so whether it's like pasting in context or attaching it, just making sure it actually has rich, detailed information to help it fill in gaps. Then getting alignment. And so before I have it do this kind of task, I'll say, hey, do you have any questions about what I'm asking you to do? And make sure that we actually get to alignment before it then goes off and does the task. Then I'll have it generate the output. And then finally edit by hand or through conversation, just depending on kind of like where the output lands. And so let's go ahead and take an example of this. Why don't you kind of read this, and when you've given it, had a chance to read it, put ready in the chat, and then we'll give it a talk. Okay, so I want to start by asking, what is something good about this? What is something this person has done well here?
They've communicated like the tone they want it to be in, sort of what they want it to evoke.
Yeah, I like that they've put in, I want it to feel exciting. And I think it's useful that they say kind of like it's not a fiduciary or fundraising board, right? Because that might be AI's assumption, because those are the most common types of boards. What else is good about this?
Seems to kind of give a concise, we want a one sheet that pitches it rather than, a flip book, for example.
Yep, it tells it like what output it's shooting for, right? Like what is the goal here? What else?
It told it what it didn't want,
Yeah, what does it not want?
the traditional board responsibilities.
Yep. Yeah, so I think in general, all of these pretty much fall under like framing. I think this is doing a really good job with framing. What is this not doing?
It doesn't have any detail about the organization.
Yeah, it doesn't have any detail about the organization. And that's going to keep AI in this very generic land, right? And so you need to make sure that kind of like you're giving it some source of context to improve it. And so I think kind of like the simplest way to improve this is to simply add two things at the end. It's to say attached is a one-pager about our org, or, kind of whatever you want to attach. And then ask me any questions before you get started. This ask me any questions before you get started, or let's align on the task before you get started, ends up saving a ton of time, because it essentially kind of is like a chance for AI to ask its questions. And like an employee, AI really benefits from an opportunity to ask its questions to kind of make sure that it understands the task before embarking on it.
I have a question. If you had, if you were in one chat and they already knew your company, would you need to do this?
It depends on kind of what it knows and kind of how it knows it versus kind of, I think in general, kind of like, if you ask it to ask me any questions before you get started, and one of its things is like, I need more context on your organization, then you could add it, right? If you've been working with your AI for a while and it has a lot of context filled up, and we'll talk more about that in the memory session and in the connector session, then kind of you might not need to attach the information. But essentially any information you attach is always more vivid to the AI than anything it's pulling from previous conversations. And so from previous conversations, it might have the gestalt of your work, but if you want it to be in high resolution, you should always attach it to the chat or paste it into that chat. And so has anyone heard this phrase context engineering? So context, yeah, Julie, you've heard it. Context engineering is essentially making sure AI has the right information to do high quality work. And essentially kind of a year ago, people were talking about prompt engineering. prompt engineering doesn't really matter so much in the world we live in now. But context engineering matters a lot. So making sure AI has access to high quality sources to do its work. Okay, so I'm going to move to the middle of the spectrum to uppercase writing. And so I wanted to share an example from my own life for this one. So this was a scenario last summer. I was working on designing a school last year, and I am not any longer. But everyone kind of like listened to this episode of Ezra Klein interviewing Jenny Anderson about a book on high school student engagement and was like, oh, you have to kind of like listen to this episode. It's like everything you think in this podcast. And so I was like, okay, I should capitalize on this. And like LinkedIn is how you do that. And I am not a frequent poster on LinkedIn or particularly a genius at it. But I was like, okay, I did not have this in my plan for the week. Let me see what I can do with AI to kind of get a post out on this topic. And so this was my process of creating the post. I called in AI where I got stuck, not everywhere I could. And so when I listened to the podcast, I had like 100 ideas of things I could write about. So my problem was not kind of like, I need an idea. It was like, how do I have just one idea and narrow it down? So what I did was I found the transcript of the podcast and I uploaded it to AI. And so in this case, I just copied and pasted it into a chat. I asked AI for a summary to kind of just like bring it down to a level that was like easier to kind of wrap my head around. And then I asked AI what Ezra Klein, who was the host, thinks. And the reason I focused on him was like I'd already met the co-author of this book at a conference and talked to her at length. I like had read the book, so I like knew a lot about what the guest thought, and I wanted to think more about what he thought, just to kind of like jog things loose in my mind. And then from there, kind of found a direction. And so then I wrote the quick draft myself and shared it with AI. And then AI redrafted it, and I took parts of what it did, but not the whole thing. And then I finally finished off by asking for ideas for a hook. So I found and then I went and checked for the verbatim quote for myself. And so let's take a look at what this actually looked like concretely. And then we'll come back to process. And so let me just click through so you can all actually read the post. So this is the final, and then we're going to go back and look at my draft. And so go ahead and put ready in the chat when you have had a chance to read this. Okay, so I think that's most folks. So as I said, I started with just saying summarize this transcript, and I dumped in the entire long transcript. I didn't remove the ads or do any other formatting. AI can kind of, figure that out for itself. And I pasted the whole very long thing. I then asked, what are the most interesting things Klein thinks? And I got back a list of kind of like 7 things. And on this list, number 5 stood out to me. And the reason it stood out to me was because I felt something about it. Immediately, I was like, oh, I both agree and disagree with this statement all at once. And so I was like, this is going to be a good thing to actually write about. And so I selected number 5 from the list as my kernel of an idea. And then I quickly tapped out this draft. So my quick draft is, at the Rock Creek School, we're pursuing a barbell tech strategy using way less and way more tech than most schools. So what that means, phone and smart devices are away for the day. We don't use ed tech apps, which disintermediate the teacher and fragment student attention. And we teach students to use professional grade tools where they direct the tool, not just AI tools, but spreadsheets, video editing software, and analytical tools like Wolfram Alpha. So tapping this out probably took me like 2 minutes because I was letting myself do the thing that they always tell you when you're writing, which is like get the downdraft down, then edit it. But I've always had a hard time kind of taking that advice. But now that I have the support of AI, I find it much easier to actually kind of act on that advice. And so I just, hit enter to share this back. And AI wrote a draft itself. And so in response, AI smoothed out the idea. So now here's what AI wrote back. So when you've had a chance to read through this, again, just put ready in the chat. Okay, so my question for you is what did I take, or what did I take from AI's version of this into the final post? Any ideas for what I used here?
The structure.
Yeah, the structure, the separation into 2 sections of less tech and more tech. That was something I took from AI. What else? I think the big one that I took is the agency, right? It kind of says like technology is integrated when it expands agency. And I ended up using that as the hinge of my post of kind of like, and essentially what's happening here is I had taught AI that agency was one of our top 2 values as a school. And we'll talk about persistent memory in 2 weeks. But it was in my AI's memory that kind of agency was our top value. And so I had taught AI that, and the AI is now essentially taking that thing from its memory and putting it back in here, which then reminded me like, oh, yes, I want our school's value to become the hinge of the post. And there's some smaller things as well, right? So for example, kind of like I think kind of like uses more plain speak. So it gets rid of the concept of disintermediating teachers. And I took the gamified ed tech phrase and the wheeled professional grade tools phrase. And so there were a few things that kind of like I took from it, but in this case, I kind of kept my draft and then mined this for things that I wanted to kind of pull into it. Sometimes it's the opposite. But I wasn't kind of being like, okay, this is my new draft and I accept it, right? And so from there, I needed a hook. And so I asked AI for a quote, and I was pretty sure I wanted it to come from the reading section of the podcast. And so I said, what does Klein say he wants for reading? And it is actually the same quote that got me into writing the post in the first place, which is if I had to choose between a school using the latest AI and one that had no screens at all, I'd choose no screens in a second. And so that, I then just did the search in the transcript to find the verbatim quote. AI is not 100% at being verbatim. It's like directionally correct. And I used that to start the post myself. And so I'm going to give you one more chance to read the final to see kind of what you think, what percent was this written by me versus AI. And so when you've kind of looked at it as much as you want to, again, put ready in the chat one more time. Okay, so one more thing for us to put in the chat, which we'll then discuss, which is what percent would you say it's written by me versus AI? No scientific answers here, so. Okay, you guys are remarkably well grouped. Sharon, why do you think it's 70% me and 30% AI?
It has a really unique voice that, from the little bit I've had the opportunity to interact with you, sounds like you. And it's fleshed out with specifics that feel very unique to what you were pursuing with the school you were building.
Yeah. Yes, something I did not outsource to it was like my main perspective, right? I used it to kind of create surface area to surface the thing I wanted to write about, but the thesis was mine. And so in that way, it is more me than if it's just like, AI, what are some LinkedIn ideas I could write about here? Yeah, what else did people observe here?
Yeah, I kind of think similar to Sharon. Like it sounded, just based on the 37 minutes so far, kind of more your voice, but maybe a little bit more the AI structure.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, and I think particularly for a format, like when we're in this middle column, like emails, LinkedIn posts, they tend to have structures that work. And AI has read, more emails than all of us collectively will read in our lifetimes. And so it has a sense of those norms and flows and back and forth. And so when you think about kind of like what AI can add, a lot of it is on the structure side. Julia, how about you? Anything you want to add?
I think I put it as a little more just because of the kind of like the phrasing of the like kind of hooky pieces were from AI, but agreed that's like the content was certainly all yours. It's more like the like grabby headliney parts that felt more AI.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that and for me, that was one of the reasons probably to collaborate with AI, right? Like I probably tend to be a little bit like nerdier in the way that I write, which is like not necessarily the right for the format of LinkedIn. And so some of the parts that AI was contributing probably helped with kind of making it, more attention grabbing for that format. There were a couple of things that I didn't do. I did not just skip the context of the podcast transcript, right? And say, like, here's a draft, right? Like, really critical for it to have that kind of rich information in the background to be working off of. Another thing I didn't do is paste the transcript and ask AI to write a LinkedIn post for me. I then eventually did this just to kind of compare it. And what I would say is that, like, one, it wrote a 600-word essay and not a LinkedIn post, but it really didn't feel like me, right? So if you are content farming and you just have to get stuff out, I understand why people would do this. But the kind of parts that like felt like me did not exist in it. And so these would be ways that I feel like kind of like you'd be using it to kind of shortcut something rather than actually as a collaborator. What I did do was recruit AI to help quickly solve my problems, right? So my problems were like too many ideas, like a rough draft that needed structure, and a need to kind of make it grabby, and kind of those things AI like helped me do along the way. And so one of the ways you can make AI still sound more like you is to use it only where you need it rather than everywhere you could. And that's a particularly important in a second when we get to the exclamation point part of the writing. But what I want to do first is just kind of stamp that like this is like I would say like a 3-draft approach that I generally use a fair amount for this like middle column writing. Where kind of like I write something by hand very quickly. It's unpolished, it's unorganized, but it's concrete, right? Like it needs to have those specifics because that's the thing it won't be able to generate itself. I then have AI generate a draft, And AI is very good at the like structural elements, right? At figuring out how do I organize these ideas? What is the through line? How do I kind of streamline this? And then my heuristic here is to stop at 80%. So something I did not do was go back and forth with AI for AI to finish its draft of the post. I find that that's how you end up with like very flattened writing, right? That kind of when you're kind of ending up in a situation where you're going back and forth with it, it's essentially kind of making it more and more AI-like. And it kind of ends up kind of taking the time you would have saved by kind of getting some leverage for AI, but not trying to force it all the way to the finish line. And then kind of finally, I edited by hand. And I think in this final edit, when you're working with AI, it's really important to texturize the writing, right? To take out AI's voice and add yours back in, right? And so that's where having some familiarity with those tells, so you know to quickly look for like, okay, that list of 3, do I mean it? Or kind of like, is that AI's list of 3? And sometimes AI comes up with good lists of 3, so I'm not saying take them all out. Just like I didn't take one of the M dashes out of the LinkedIn post because I would have used an M dash there. But just making sure that kind of you get it to a place that it works, that feels like you, rather than kind of continuing to go back and forth with AI and having it seem less and less and less like you as you go. And my heuristic...
Sarah?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Quick question on things in terms of like writing styles. Like, does the language model stick to anything in the way of like AP style writing, Oxford commas, like those kinds of things, or do you have to dictate that?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It has like each of them have their own default for things like that. You can override them. And when we talk about memory, I'll talk about how you can actually kind of put into your AI's memory things like I like an Oxford comma. So please always include it when writing.
Thanks.
Yeah. But my general heuristic here is that AI excels at the conceptual and flattens the concrete. And so again, if you think back to like FCage for lowercase writing, like give it that context of kind of like the, one pager on your organization or whatever it is, because that's what it can't bring to the table and what it's always going to be flattening out. Whereas kind of understanding the structure of information is essentially how these models were trained. And so it's very good at kind of structuring and organizing information. And so this is, kind of when you're moving into the exclamation point writing, I think it can be really important to make sure that you're then using AI as just a problem-solving tool, not as the primary author, right? And so in that middle spectrum, it was like, I did a draft, it did a draft, I took some things from it. When it's an exclamation point, you kind of run the risk of like really taking your own voice, your own thoughts, your life experiences out of the writing you're doing it, if you're not kind of using it more judiciously. And so here, I think about there being kind of a spectrum and some kind of common ways of pulling in AI to help. And so with the podcast, I kind of had too many ideas and I was looking to kind of narrow it down. But sometimes you're kind of looking for ideas. So for example, you can mine your own raw materials. So if you have kind of like meeting notes for kind of a collaborative cross-organizational meeting, you could say, what are some interesting ideas I could write a newsletter about for our community, right? And so it's kind of a kind of new way of kind of asking old information about things that you could take from it to your audience. You can also reflect on your own thinking, right? And so do any of you talk back and forth with your AI? Yeah, Julie, tell us about the talking that you do with your AI.
I find that my husband would attest to this. I find that I verbalize my thinking out loud, and I get through my thoughts better when I speak versus when I sit down to write. It's too forced when I write, I feel like. So I talk to it all the time, and in fact, I talk to it more than I write with it. I feel like my voice stays better in that way, but I am much more inclined to sit on it and talk to it, or I'll talk to Evernote and then pull up a transcript and drop it in. But if I can start verbally first, it's better for me.
And you're not alone. A lot of people like to interact. A lot of people actually don't like typing also. So not just writing, but they'll dictate. And so in ChatGPT, there's a dictate here. And the dictate is one way, whereas kind of the voice is two way. So it's conversation back and forth. And so depending on whether you just kind of want to do a brain dump and just dictate everything out of your head, it